Now, transition to another interesting topic in sports right now. The national championship playoff, the college football playoff, is what's better known as, was being played the last few years, up from 2014 on to current in four teams, where the top four seeds that are voted on by the committee end up in the playoff. That is now being talked about as basically being expanded into a 12 games or 12 teams uh, national championship playoff tournament, which will basically, and we'll kind of break that down. Have you seen anything on this? First, I'll start with that.
No, I am uninformed on this, and this was a story time sort of thing for me. So I'm kind of
Mm.
curious the feelings are in this. I've never really liked I never really liked like the selection committee for college football in the first place. That's pretty much my contribution to this.
Well, it's so the selection committee has always favored the Power Five conferences, which, if you don't not familiar with the, college football or college in general, there's the Power Five conferences, which is the SEC, the ACC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the Pac-12. Those basically five conferences are called the Power Fives because they are where basically the majority of the money and a majority of the good teams are. I mean, let's be honest. That's where a majority of the good teams are. So those conferences are always favored because the level of competition is higher than in other conferences, and they just have bigger names, more money, all that fun stuff. So, those are the conferences that hold teams like Alabama, Clemson, Texas, Texas A&M, Ohio State, Michigan, all those, schools that you've heard of or known in any sports, you'll hear those names.
Gotcha.
Florida State, all of those. Now, that being said, the committees always favored those Power Five conferences, and they always kind of not denote, but like just don't show any love really to the other conferences, as well as maybe even even teams that are in those conferences that aren't as big as some of the other teams. They don't show as much love to, so they kind of have a lot of favoritism going on, and that always is shown. Notre Dame, for example, of the 12 people that make up the committee, one of them is literally from Notre Dame. So because of that, Notre Dame having 1/12 of the vote over all of the other college football teams is part of the reason why Notre Dame is usually rated a little higher than they should be. And I'm a Notre Dame fan, and I'll readily admit that that's usually the case, and I get that. Um, so not only Notre Dame being rated that high and everything, but then they, I think, if you looked at the history of the playoff the last 7 years that it's been going on, you basically have like Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, and I believe it was like Oklahoma and Georgia taking up like 90% of the appearances in the playoff versus like any other team, which is just sad and unfortunately why the playoff was flawed and why it needed to expand. Now, I will say I thought it should have expanded to 8 teams, and I thought it should be the Power 5 conference champions, should all make it automatically, and then it should be the 3 at-large bids that the committee votes on based on teams like UCF talking about how they deserve to make it, Coastal Carolina talking about how they deserve to make it this year being a smaller team, Cincinnati talking about how they should have made it this year. Things like that would have been those 3 at-large bids. Now, the way that this 12 team expansion is going, which is, like I said, it caught me off guard because I didn't think that it would go as far as 12 teams. I thought maybe they would move to 8 first and then expand to 12 or 16 from there. But going straight to the 12, it does make a little sense when you actually look into what the ratings are. And of course, we can get into how it's going to favor teams or whatever. But essentially, the way that it works and the way that they broke it down for as far as like what they're actually voting on is there is 12 teams that would make it. 6 of them would be the 6th highest ranked conference champions. Then from there, you would have the other 6 teams being the 6th highest ranked non-conference champions. So even if you didn't win your conference championship, but you're rated super high, let's say, Alabama plays Georgia and Alabama's 2 and Georgia's 3, and they play in the conference championship and Alabama wins. Well,
Okay.
how much do you really, take? How much do you really, hurt Georgia as far as rating and everything for that when they were playing the number 2 team in the nation that won the championship? They would get it essentially. That's how that would play. Now you
Okay.
would also get teams like this would add Cincinnati in the mix. This might add Coastal Carolina in the mix as well, things like that.
Okay.
Because it's the highest six conference champions, then six non-conference champions, the highest rank. So kind of plays out that way. So it puts a little more emphasis on the conference championship, which means that the regular season matters a bit more because if you make it to the conference championship, you have an automatic bid if you win it. So it's one of those where you have incentive to make it and win it.
Okay.
Now for other teams that don't win it, again, like I said, that shows where in that scenario where Georgia's number 3 and Alabama's 2, even though Georgia lost to the number 2 team in the nation and aren't a conference champion, they would still make it as a non-conference champion. That's where that would kind of, they would factor in. Some other things interesting about this is the top 4 ranked conference champions. So the top 4 teams, so the top 6 conference champions make it. The top 4 of those get ranked 1 through 4 and receive a bye in the first round. So
Okay.
essentially, you have this previous year, you would have Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, and Georgia all being ranked 1 through 4 and having buys. Essentially, is how that would have worked this previous year. And that, and then you would have all the other teams, Cincinnati, Coastal Carolina, all these, Penn State, all these other teams that would have made it but would have had to play. So the first round would essentially be 8 teams playing, 4 teams, the top 4 being on a bye. Those 8 teams would play. Winners of those 8 teams would be 4 teams. Those 4 teams would play the other highest 4 seeds, and then you move down the line until you get your champion. That's the way the tournament would play out. Now, something interesting about this is the requirement for being a top 4 ranked team that wins your conference championship that gets a bye basically is built in that any independent team, such as Notre Dame, who doesn't play a conference championship, would not be eligible for this. So they wouldn't be eligible to make it as a conference champion and receive a bye if they were one of the top 4. So that means that Notre Dame could win all of their games, be the best team in the nation, be the number 1 ranked team in the nation, and they would still, no matter what, not receive a bye.
Okay. Interesting.
So it's an interesting, but I believe Notre Dame actually supported this or something like that, or supported this venture. So it's one of those where, like, it doesn't sound fair to Notre Dame, but also Notre Dame, the whole playoff committee and everything, and even before that, there's a lot of favoritism shown to Notre Dame. So, it's understandable now that there's a little bit, the pendulum finally swings a little bit in the opposite direction. But that's just something interesting. So that's the way it would play out. So again, your top 4 teams being like the previous year, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Clemson, all getting a bye. And then the other 8 teams fill in from there and play each other to then play those top 4.
Okay.
So you finally get matchups where basically, Cincinnati makes it. Cincinnati wins their first game and then has to go against one of those 4 teams. Well, they can finally prove whether or not they're one of the teams that should be there or not.
Right.
And you can, say that the committee. Now, the issues with this is that, of course, people are cite, well, it's if the committee's ranking them and say like Ohio State, who we're expecting every year to pretty much win win the Big Ten. It would be shocking if they didn't, kind of thing.
Right.
Or Alabama, if they didn't win the SEC, it would be not shocking, not as shocking as Ohio State winning the Big Ten, but it would be a big deal. Same with Clemson not winning the ACC. That would be shocking if they didn't. The thing is it's one of those where those teams are probably going to be ranked very high. So when they do win their conference champions, they're probably automatically going to be probably one of those top 4 that get a bye. So then maybe there's some favoritism there that can play, but at least those other teams are at least getting a chance, when they
Right.
never did in the past.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah, I can see that. I guess I could see the merits of it then. Just an interesting
yeah.
change. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, it would be Coastal Carolina, you're in. Cincinnati, you're in. Those are the 2 teams that were really, talk UCF from that one year. They're in. That's and you finally get those teams that are like, okay, now prove it. You've talked a lot of game and you've talked yourself up a lot, and that's great. And you know what? Coastal Carolina made the freaking playoff. Like if we had this tournament last year and they played and made it and won the championship, I would be ecstatic. It'd be amazing. But
Yeah.
it's one of those where now it's a prove it kind of thing. And again, like I said, the 4 teams getting a bye. We know who those 4 teams are probably going to be almost every year, but at least other teams are getting a chance to make.
And what was the team that there was like the meme of? I think it was like a year or two ago that like they are the actual champions and stuff because they didn't
That
get
was
ranked.
UCF.
That was UCF. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
UCF is the one that declared themselves national champions because they didn't get a shot at the playoff and they won technically all of their games, and then they went and won against Auburn in their bowl game. So
Okay. Got it. That's one struck in my head.
yeah, so that's what I'm saying. UCF would immediately make it in this scenario. Now, this if this was voted, this is being voted upon, I believe, later this week in Chicago, actually. Which I saw a great tweet that was like, I absolutely wish that we could just, I wish, or I think it was Cam Ellis, who I love, who used to be for NBC. I forget where he is now, but writer for the Bears. Love him. If you love the Bears, you should follow Cam Ellis. Um, he said something about like he wishes that this committee, he wishes there was a world where this committee was just voting inside of a Portillo's parking lot. And I was like, absolutely, that would be fantastic. Just this whole thing gets voted on in a freaking Portillo's parking lot would be amazing. But yeah, so we'll see. They're meeting in Chicago this week to kind of, determine whether or not they want to move forward with this decision. If they did move forward with the decision and it was voted upon, yes, and put into effect, it wouldn't take effect for, I believe, until 2023 or no, 2024. I think it is.
Okay. Do you think
So
they will approve it?
I think it's really up in the air. Like I can't say either way. Like I
Yeah.
honestly don't know. It makes a lot of sense. And the issue with NCAA, the issue with college football recently has been that, again, like I had reiterated at the beginning of the segment, is that Clemson, Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama have basically taken up the majority of the spots in the college football playoff since its existence 7 years ago. So it's one of those where college football's been losing some popularity because teams aren't getting a shot. So at least this would give teams a shot, even though there's still some favoritism towards those top teams. So I think yes, I would say if I had to be like put to it 100%, give my opinion, I think yes. I think it's going to be a tight vote, but I think a yes, because I think they have to save the sport and I think they have to expand because they have to include other teams. I'm tired of every year hearing about UCF or Coastal Carolinas or Cincinnati's and not seeing them at least get a chance, because I would love for them to get a chance. Like I want to see if they can prove it, like it's
Yeah.
one of those, we got the game of BYU versus Coastal Carolina. And that game ended in literally a last second pass caught at the 1 yard line. Time runs out. BYU loses and Coastal Carolina holds on. Well, what we learned was that was a great game and those were two good teams. But like until we see them in the playoff winning games, we don't know how either of those teams are. Maybe those two teams would have beaten Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, all them. Who knows? We don't know because they weren't in it. That's the problem. So they
Yeah.
need to expand. So I thought eight teams was where they were going to go next, because obviously that's the next evolution of going from 2 to 4 to 8.
Right.
But they're going to jump right up to 12 and go with these rules. I'm fine with it.